Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Elissa Bemporad, and I'm coming in from New York. So good evening to you, or good afternoon, wherever you might be. I teach Jewish history, especially Eastern European Jewish history at Queens College and the City University of New York. And I have written extensively, especially about Jews in the Soviet context. So the Jews of Belarus, the Jews of Ukraine, and my talk today focuses on the permutation, the way in which the charge against Jews, the accusation, the false myth according to which Jews kill Christian children for ritual purposes, how it changed over time, its modern permutation and manifestation in the context of modern Eastern Europe, especially during the context of the war, World War II, and the post-World War II period. So I'm going to start, as everyone usually does in these cases, with sharing my screen. I hope I am successful. I think I am. So here is my, I'm sharing my screen here.
You see it fine, just if you can enlarge it by the button that looks like a chalice on the bottom right near the scale.
Yeah, unfortunately I can't, for some reason I can't do that. I wish I could. I usually can, but
Are you using the button that looks like the chalice on the bottom near the slide? There. To the right, to the right.
Oh, this?
Two more to the right.
This?
One more.
This?
That one.
Zoom slider. I apologize for this, but is it Zoom?
No, it should just be that button.
Yeah, it's not. Oh, here it is. Okay. Okay. So
Perfect,
hopefully this will go, this will move in a more smooth way. Anyway, I would like to thank Olga Lempert for inviting me to give this talk. I would like to thank everyone here, and I would like to thank Doron, who helped me with the even now with the IT. The talk that I will be giving today is based on my book, Legacy of Blood, Jews, Pogroms, and Ritual Murder in the Lands of the Soviet, which came out last year with Oxford University Press. I can say that you might consider yourself lucky because I will only be focusing on ritual murder and not on pogroms. So my goal is really to explore, as I said, the persistence and the permutation of the blood libel, which is the false accusation that goes back to the Middle Ages, according to which Jews kill Christian children to use their blood for ritual purposes, primarily as a crucial ingredient for matzah at the time of Passover. And here I'm just showing you some images or representations of the ritual murder accusation. In a way, the accusation of ritual murder, as most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, is closely connected to the accusation that Jews killed Christ. So in a way, it is the reenactment of the killing of Christ. So I want to consider, as I said, this persistence, the permutation in the context of modern Eastern Europe at a time of great crisis, tragedy, war for everyone. So during World War II and in the immediate post-war period, that is in the post-Holocaust period. So I will be focusing primarily on those territories in the Soviet Union. After all, this is where the Holocaust actually really began in 1941, when the Germans attacked these territories during the summer of 1941. This year, as you all know, marks the 80th anniversary of some of the worst mass shooting operations against Jews carried out by the Germans and their collaborators in primarily in Ukraine and in Belarus. But before I do that, I would like to visually introduce this topic of change, this topic of permutation of the blood libel accusation. And in order to introduce this, I want to show you a painting. This is a painting, of course, it depicts ritual murder. It does not pertain to World War II, but it does capture one of the modern permutations of the accusation script, whereby it is not a child, a Christian child, who is being murdered by the alleged perpetrators, but it's a young woman. This painting was commissioned by a Russian aristocrat in 1898. It was publicly shown in St. Petersburg, and it has been recently discovered in London. What it conveys is really the fear and the anxiety of the Slavic people that is materialized through the ritual murder of a young woman who's obviously, or she seems to be Slavic. It's a massive painting. It's 5 meters by 8. And you see, of course, here a group of dreadful Jewish men who look like vampires. Here you see a close-up, and the rabbis who carry out the ritual by drawing the young woman's blood with a number of sharp instruments, including their teeth. And it's very disturbing. And the blood libel narrative is further modernized here by the addition of an obviously sexual subtext. So you have the naked body of the prey. She's not only murdered through torture and the drawing of her blood, she also appears as the potential victim of rape. And I'll go back to the slide, as the ritual murder almost becomes a sexual murder. So I'm just kind of visually introducing the topic of change, the topic of modernization, permutation of this ancient accusation. Some of you might know that this drawing, this painting is based on the well-known case known as the Tisza Eslar affair, which was a blood libel that led to a trial in Austria-Hungary in 1882-1883, which involved the disappearance of a young woman, and Jews were accused of ritually murdering her. And it's a lengthy trial that was followed by this accusation, eventually resulting in the acquittal of all of the accused. But it left a strong trace of a visual evidence of this crime. And now I would like to move on to an observation which is necessary in order to appreciate the question of change that this accusation underwent in the context of modern Eastern Europe. So with few exceptions, under the Soviet regime, and of course, Ukraine and Belarus came under the Soviets after 1917, the blood libel accusation did not dovetail with the pogrom, with anti-Jewish violence. And at least during the 1920s and 1930s, public attacks and displays of violence against Jews were not tolerated in the Soviet context. This attitude on the part of Soviet authorities grows out of the Soviet campaign against anti-Semitism, which was launched in 1918 as a way to reject the Tsarist legacy of anti-Semitism, and it was launched by Vladimir Lenin, And it was celebrated, at least on paper, until World War II. And I'll come back to this point at the end of the talk. So that claims of Jewish ritual murder in the Soviet Union would be followed by criminal investigations, meaning the main thing here to keep in mind is that accusations against Jews under the Soviet government did not disappear. They continued, but they did not lead to Jews being put on trial, right? So they would be followed by criminal investigations, by the arrest of those who made the false accusation. This did not happen anywhere else in Europe at the time, where usually, just like in the case of the Tisa Eslar affair, or in the cases that occurred under the Tsar, the accused Jews were usually put on trial and in some cases arrested. So unlike Tsarist Russia and elsewhere in Eastern Europe, in the Soviet Union, the blood libel ceased to be politically and culturally acceptable. Again, accusations against Jews did take place, and I'm showing you here two quotes from two instances that I study in my book. One takes place in Poltava, 1929, in Ukraine, the other one in Minsk in 1937. And as you can see from these two cases, I will not read the quotes for you. I presumably everybody can see them. The blood libel did, crops up socially, but there are no trials against Jews accused of committing ritual murder were ever held in the Soviet Union. So the Bolsheviks showed this impressive resolve, commitment, it seemed, in stomping out the blood libel and prosecuted those who resorted to this accusation. So in this case, in these two cases, those who made the accusation in Poltava and in Minsk were actually put on trial. They lost their jobs and they were arrested. So from the very beginning, the Soviet regime publicly repudiated the Beilis case. The Beilis case, the Beilis affair that I am sure that most of you are familiar with, 1911, 1913 in Kiev, when Menachem Mendel Beilis, who you see here, is being arrested by the Tsarist authorities in the city of Kiev. And here I'm showing you this poster that was that appeared in the city of Kiev on the eve of Passover 1912, warning parents that it was, the Passover was approaching and that they should be aware of, they should be careful with their children because this was the Passover. So the Beilis affair was, as I assume most of you know, one of the most spectacular blood libel cases in modern Europe. The trial was the result of the intervention of high echelons of the Russian government with the support of the Ministry of Justice and the approval of Nicholas II, and it was fueled by reactionary and monarchist elements in Russian society. Now, the Menachem Mendel Beilis was eventually acquitted, and with a dubious verdict that left room for much disbelief. And there are echoes of the Beilis affair throughout the 20th century in Eastern Europe. And I'll end with one of those echoes. Here, I also want to show you two quotes, again, to emphasize the fact that the Soviets did not tolerate the ritual murder. This is a quote from a conservative Russian thinker from 1904, and a quote from Vladimir Lenin from 1918. So what happens after the Soviets are in power with regard to the Beilis affair is that in an event of great symbolic significance, the Soviet authorities put on trial, and executed in downtown Kiev the major figures involved in the Beilis trial, including Vera Chibiryak, who was the leader of this group of thieves who actually killed the young boy Andrei Yushchinsky, and also put on trial the main prosecutor and the chief eyewitness in the Beilis affair case. So it's really kind of a public statement: we do not tolerate this. So, and now I want to move on to I guess moving towards the main topic of the talk, which is really what happens in the context of World War II. And I'm showing you here the words that I will not read, but you can read for yourself, by a Jewish Red Army tank commander who travels through Ukraine in the midst of the war at the end of 1943, emphasizing the fact that he did not see any Jews. No Jews were left in these cities, and this echoes, for those of you who know, also the words, the better known words of the great Soviet Jewish writer Vasily Grossman, who wrote about this in Ukraine Without Jews, one of the essays that he wrote during World War II. So World War II, as you know, drastically swayed the habits and rhetoric of violence in the German occupied territories of the Soviet Union during the total ethnic war that was unleashed in June 1941, in which approximately 1.5 million Jews were killed, most of them in mass shooting operations carried out by the Einsatzgruppen, the German death squads, and their collaborators. What we have is a revived anti-Bolshevik sentiment that quickly comes to intersect with wartime anti-Jewish propaganda. And the anti-Jewish propaganda from World War II often featured ritual murder subtext, often built on the century-old myth that Jews kill Christian children because they need the blood for ritual purposes. And in turn, the blood libel trope drew new inspiration from the myth of Judeo-Bolshevism, namely the myth according to which Soviet communism was really part of a wider Jewish scheme to seize power and rule the world. So I want to show you here a drawing. This is a drawing made in November 1941 by a Ukrainian worker who depicted Stalin holding a knife or a sword, which is, dripping in blood. And he is surrounded by hundreds of skulls. He seemingly, this Ukrainian worker, built his amateur art on the well-known anti-Bolshevik depictions from the Civil War period, the period that goes from 1918 to 1921, when the Red Army is faced with a war against the Ukrainian troops, Polish troops in the Polish-Soviet war, and the White Army that was fighting for the reinstatement of the Tsar. And these are posters that some of you might be familiar with, where you have Leon Trotsky, the head and the commander of the Red Army, the founder, who's of course of Jewish background, is surrounded also by a sea of skulls and bones. He is depicted clearly as Satan. This is another depiction, very similar. Trotsky surrounded by, this is from the Polish-Soviet War of 1920, surrounded by again, skulls, and he's holding weapon, which is this dagger, which is drenched in blood. This one is another more rare depiction of Trotsky. This is from a Wehrmacht collection, actually, which is in the Evil Archives in New York. And so you see the theme of Trotsky depicted as Satan, the blood dripping from his hands, and acting on behalf of the Bolsheviks. Now, in the drawing that I showed you from 1941, which builds on this theme, of course, and on these images that were retained in the cultural memory at the time, you have the Ukrainian worker who portrays the Soviet leader toiling on behalf of the bloodthirsty Jew as the embodiment of Judeo-Bolshevism. And the text on the drawing reads, as you can see here, Stalin is the bloody enemy of the people who brought destruction to the whole world. The sea of blood flows from the people in the name of the regime of the Jews and the communists. Stalin is the hireling of the Jews. Stalin is the bloody enemy of the people. So this is not an iconographic representation of ritual murder, but it does capture the ways in which during World War II, Jews came to be seen as the prime actors of a modern version of ritual murder, this time carried out in the name of communism. At times, Nazi propaganda explicitly encouraged the exploitation of the blood libel theme in conjunction with the Judeo-Bolshevik myth. Ritual murder and communism both embodied the Jewish spirit and lust for power. So in the spring of 1942, for example, the Germans executed all the Jews in a small town in the Kiev province, the town of Miedvin, accusing them of murdering, for ritual purposes, a Red Army soldier. And when the body of the POW was discovered, the Germans spread the blood libel rumor. They staged a trial and sentenced the Jews to death. Prior to their execution, the victims were tortured, although there was no immediate reason for the Germans to exploit ritual murder to justify their extermination policy. They still chose to do so. In 1943, a book on the blood libel entitled Jüdischer Ritualmord, or the Jewish ritual murder, was published and distributed throughout German-occupied Soviet territories. The Nazi Party member Helmut Schramm wrote it to promote anti-Bolshevik propaganda and in a way stimulate anti-Semitism among those handling the Jewish question. This is an edition from 1944. In the foreword to the book, a prominent Third Reich ideologue and a professor, his name was Johann von Wiers, known for his anti-Jewish polemics, reminded the reader that Judaism was a biologically hereditary form of criminality, and that he who struggles against Judaism does the work of the Lord and fights God's battle. Another example of, the ritual murder deployed in the context of World War II comes from the Ukrainian language newspapers published under German occupation that really provide an example of how the blood libel theme was exploited in the context of war. The August 1943 issue of a Kiev published newspaper featured a detailed analysis of the murder of Tsar Nicholas II and his family. It was published, and you can read here the quote, on the 25th anniversary of the massacre at Yekaterinburg, and entitled The Jew's Right Hand. This account presented the assassination of the Tsar's family as a ritual murder carried out by Jewish Bolsheviks. And I encourage you to read here the quote. Now, the order to execute the Romanov family came directly from Lenin, but the telegram from Moscow with the directive was indeed signed by Sverdlov, who was Jewish, of Jewish background, and who in 1918 was chairman of the Central Executive Committee of the Congress of Soviets. In its account of the murder, the Ukrainian newspaper provided the names and ethnicity of the major killers of the Tsar's family and identifies seven of 9 as Jewish, as you can see from this quote. What is interesting is that the ritual murder accusation turned up even in those regions such as Central Asia that did not come under direct German military occupation and were thus removed from this kind of vigorous wartime propaganda. Soviet Kyrgyzia, for example, which saw a momentous growth in the Jewish population from a small pre-war Bukharan and Ashkenazi communities, as thousands of refugees fleeing Nazi-occupied territories settled there, experienced the blood allegation, albeit in a new wartime context. The refugees included both Soviet citizens and Polish Jews who, as former residents of pre-war Poland, had Polish citizenship. In the summer of 1942, a group of Jewish women who were married to Red Army military personnel who was fighting at the front addressed a letter to Stalin himself and the Central Committee of the Communist Party, and they complained about anti-Semitism. And this is a quote from their complaint that I will not read to you, but you have it here, and I encourage you to read it. And what it really kind of draws on the accusation of cannibalism. Now, wartime food shortages, rumors about cannibalism on the Eastern Front, as well as the actual murder of 2 children in the city of Tokmak, served as the background and maybe the pretext for the accusation. These were well removed from the more traditional Passover plot that we started out with, which involved the abduction of Christian children and the use of their blood for religious purposes, in particular the consumption of matzah. Both the investigation conducted by party authorities in Tokmak and Frunze and the ensuing Soviet secret police report confirmed the Jewish women's grievance that you read here about. The report stated that widespread anti-Semitic comments resulting in harassment and physical abuse targeting Jews fell into 3 major categories. First, that Russians were dying at the front because of the Jews. Second, that prices were high because of the Jews. And finally, what concerns us, the Jews were killing the children of other nationalities, drinking their blood and using their body parts to make soup. So it's a secularized version of the blood libel, as the food containing human flesh and blood replaces the matzah in a murder that is no longer necessarily ritual in nature, but becomes predatory and becomes cannibalistic. The report contained no remark about the possible ritual needs for the blood. And one more observation that seems important relates to the fact that most Soviet Jews were no longer religious, as you know, most of them by 1942 as a result of the anti-religious campaigns carried out systematically in the Soviet context. So the idea that they used blood for a religious ritual like matzah was less plausible. But their bloodthirstiness becomes instead an ethnic marker, a racial trait, rather than a religious one. I would now like to move on to another case study, one case study that allows us to really zoom in, and we are on Zoom, so that's okay, on the impact of the war on the permutation of the blood libel narrative. So we are in the summer of 1945 in the beautiful city of Lviv, or Lvov, Lviv in Ukrainian. Today, this is an image from today, of course. In Western Poland, here's Lvov or Lviv, which was liberated by the Germans and incorporated by the Soviets into the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. And Lviv became the space, the arena of a ritual murder accusation against the Jews after the war. According to the allegations, local Jews had kidnapped Polish and Ukrainian children, murdered them, and hidden their corpses within the confines of one of the local synagogues, instigated, that I'm showing you here, instigated by rumors. A crowd of 400 people gathered in the marketplace, in the Lviv marketplace, the Krakowski marketplace, by the neighboring synagogue on Buhilna Street 3 that I'm showing you here. And in the midst of, commotion and a number of physical attacks against local Jews, passionate assertions resounded throughout the crowd, and there was talk of a pogrom that seized everyone's emotions. These included statements of disappointment that Hitler had not come to Lviv 20 years earlier. Remember, this case takes place in 1945, which would have prevented the Jews from killing our children. Some people voiced their rage over the traces of blood of the allegedly murdered children in the synagogue courtyard. Others cried that Jews stole children, slaughtered them, and turned their bodies into food to sell at the marketplace. Without the prompt intervention of the Lviv city police, these accusations most likely would have spiraled into a pogrom. As it happened elsewhere in post-war Eastern Europe, in Krakow, for example, and in the most well-known case that I'm sure that some of you are familiar with, on July 4th, 1946, in the city of Kielce, following a ritual murder accusation, 42 Jews were killed and more than 40 were injured. And these were Holocaust survivors. The city of Kielce was in Poland. Now, while the Lviv case shares some similarities with other instances of anti-Jewish violence that occurred in post-war Poland, it also has some distinct features that pertain to the Soviet government's response to the ritual murder accusation. The events in Lviv also confirmed the changes that occurred in the allegation itself, shedding light on the complicated interplay between the Blood Libel accusation, World War II, and the newly fragile social environment that emerged in many cities and towns now under communism and under the Soviet regime. So the ritual murder accusation in Lviv took place in the wake of the return of hundreds of Jewish refugees. Most of them were Polish Jews who had evacuated to Central Asia during the war and who sought repatriation to Poland in 1945. For the Jewish refugees, resettlement came with major obstacles, disappointments, growing tensions with the local population. Over questions of property restitution and the psychological trauma stemming from the demise of one of the major centers of Jewish life in pre-Holocaust Europe. This is an image of the synagogue on Buhilna Street today. So many Jews at the time took shelter. So these Polish Jewish refugees took shelter in the synagogue building that I'm showing you, which was one of the few synagogues still standing after the war and post-war Lviv. from June 14, 1945 to July 14, 1946, the Lviv Police Department, the Lviv Public Prosecutor's Office, and the Prosecutor's Office of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic and the Soviet secret police investigated the accusation that alleged Jews were killing Polish and Ukrainian children in the synagogue and then hiding their bodies in the building basement, right? In the basement of this building. So you have an investigation, right? And in the report of the investigation, the senior investigator of the Lviv prosecutor's office stated, as if to reassure the public that, you know, he had done with diligence his work and he had searched everywhere, that there was no evidence of these bodies. And you can read the quote that I'm showing you here. The police found instead large quantities of chicken feathers and traces of chicken blood. Of course, this is the poultry slaughtered according to the Jewish ritual in the synagogue courtyard that is right here. This is the synagogue courtyard that I'm showing at the bottom of the right-hand side of this image. So the fact that in 1945, the Jews in Lviv performed ritual slaughter in the synagogue courtyard might have been, at least for some, evocative of an alleged Jewish adeptness with blood rituals and reminiscent of other alleged Jewish rituals, namely the blood libel. The police report recorded the details of the incident, which gained momentum as Jews were leaving the synagogue building. At the time of the accusation, one Polish woman declared that the bodies of Polish children were with slit throats were found in the synagogue. This is the power of rumors, right? And people who are getting anxious and emotional. She then substantiated her charge by stating that the police had already arrested a large number of Jews for this crime, which wasn't true. In response to the allegation, a group of people chased a Jewish woman through the marketplace and attempted to kill her because, as they shouted, Poles hid you from the Germans and you killed Polish children. Another person involved in the unrest reportedly stated that Jews steal our children and slaughter them, and so on. These are quotes from the investigation. And this is from the archives, the provincial archives in the city of Lviv. Here you can see the original. And one there was one person who will be arrested who called to set fire to the synagogue and kill all the Jews. Now, there was a second search of the synagogue's premises, followed to ascertain that indeed no murder of children had taken place. The secret police eventually arrested 5 people of Ukrainian and Polish nationality. And one of them that I want to dwell on preoccupied actually Soviet authorities. He was a 25-year-old man by the name of Ivan Fedak, who had worked for the Germans from 1941 until the Soviets reoccupied the city. And he served in the police force in Lviv, as well as in the SS division Halichina that collaborated with the Germans in killing Jews. And the Lviv prosecutor's office found out that Fedak, this young Ukrainian, not only had engaged in blackmail and contraband under the Germans, but that he had also taken part in the massacres of Jews and the Red Army soldiers. So he's put on trial together with the others, and he's confirmed guilty. He's charged with counter-revolutionary disturbance and incitement of national hatred. This is all Soviet language. And he is sentenced to prison. One more thing about about this, the case of Lviv, and I just want to, again, leave you with the image of the synagogue, is that the ritual aspect of the alleged murder is secondary, it seems. It's mostly inferred. The allegation of cannibalism, on the other hand, is in a way spurred by the hunger and the miserable conditions that so many had experienced during and after the war. This looms prominently, it seems. This is a form of cannibalism that is disconnected from the assumed religious context of Passover. The social memory of widespread cannibalism during the Holodomor, the Ukrainian famine of 1932-1933, and the siege of Leningrad from 1941 to 44, which have played a major role, might have played a major role in the alleged abuse. Moreover, there seems to have been a natural case of cannibalism in Nazi-occupied Lviv. There are archival documents from the war that mention rumors of human body parts being sold at the city's marketplace, which eventually set off a German investigation that resulted in the arrest of several people involved in the case. Of course, since those Jews who had not yet been exterminated by the Germans and their collaborators had no free access to the marketplace, those arrested were by definition not Jewish. While reminiscent of alleged Jewish practice of religiously driven blood rituals, the Lviv case was also the outcome of wartime violence. Real instances of cannibalism and food shortages removed the blood libel from its ritual aspect and promoted the emergence of a new notion of Jewish murder with no direct mention of ritual. The Lviv case was in this respect not unique. In fact, blaming Jews of committing a modern ritual murder or acts of cannibalism against non-Jewish children and profiteering by selling human flesh at the marketplace occasionally emerged in the immediate post-war months and years. In the summer of 1945, for example, in the city of Kryvyi Rog, in the Dnipropetrovsk province, the Soviet secret police arrested a group of Ukrainians and Russians. It accused them of distributing flyers throughout nearby cities about an alleged Jewish gang involved in taking Russian children, killing them, and then making sausages and meat pies out of the children's flesh to sell at the marketplace. These flyers also denounced the oppressors of the Russian and Ukrainian people, as the Jewish alleged murderers were labeled of using the children's flesh to make soap to sell in the marketplace. I thought I had a quote of that, but I don't have a quote of that. So just to move on, I also want to mention that ultimately Soviet authorities changed their mind, and this kind of reflects the shift that we see in the context of the Soviet politics about anti-Semitism from the interwar period, which is, fighting against anti-Semitism, to the post-war period, which is encouraging anti-Semitism. So Soviet authorities changed their mind about the culprits in the Lviv affair, which is really symptomatic of how the Soviets moved away from their campaign against anti-Semitism, which was no longer a concern of the state. So by April 1946, which is less than 1 year after their arrest, the new head of the prosecutor's office released those who had been arrested in the Lviv case, saying that there was no evidence. And even though Ivan Fedak, the guy that I mentioned earlier, had actively collaborated with the Germans in killing Jews and undermined Soviet power, the follow-up investigation of late 1946 took his words at face value. He was not guilty of instigating national hatred against the Jewish people. and participating in the ritual murder accusation because, as he claimed, he was not at the site of the incident when it happened. He said that he was at a restaurant, so he was not guilty. The way in which Soviet authorities quickly revised their approach to the crime was a strong sign of the times. By late 1946, the Soviets showed little interest in the subject of Nazi collaboration, anti-Semitism, or in stomping out ritual murder and prosecuting those who engaged in the accusation. And as an example, I'm just going to briefly mention the doctor's plot of 1953, the alleged conspiracy of Soviet doctors, almost all of them were of Jewish background, to murder government and party officials. And this case was referred to as the Bailey's case of the atomic age by one scholar. And from below, and I'm showing you here two quotes, one is from Moscow 1953, one is from Vilnius in Lithuania 1953. From below, the many people interpreted the decision from above to arrest the Jewish doctors in the aftermath of the doctor's plot as a new kind of blood libel, as a new kind of ritual murder. Thus, again, the permutation of this accusation. So in conclusion, we tend to associate the blood libel with the Middle Ages, right? And I am sure that had I asked you at the very beginning of the talk, what do you associate the ritual murder accusation with? Many of you would have said, you know, the Middle Ages, something ancient, something old. How was it then possible that this false accusation persisted for so long, undergoing changes over time and in specific contexts? And I think that I've shown you different examples of changes that take place. And I want to here refer to the work of a great historian who's a role model for all scholars and historians of Eastern Europe and Russia. And I'm referring to historian Jonathan Frankel, who reminded us that this is not the right question to ask when studying ritual murder, right? How is it possible that it could take place in modern times? He criticized the conventional wisdom among historians to focus on the gradual marginalization of the ritual murder charge over the span of the last 350 years as essentially flawed. Instead, Frankel affirmed the importance of seeing the extraordinary vitality of this false myth in modern as well as contemporary history. He argued in favor of investigating ritual murder in the specific context of the modern Jewish experience as a byproduct of modernization, as the outgrowth of the dark times, of the dark side of modern times. And if the irrational is an essential ingredient of modernization, as Frankel argued, then the blood libel could surely become a factor in the hyper-rational, modern, atheistic societies that both Nazis and Bolsheviks strove to create. And I think I will conclude, and I think this is the image that was used to publicize this talk, that the perfect symbiosis between the Judeo-Bolshevik myth and the more traditional ritual murder, it has, you know, since reemerged in the Russian context. For example, there is an investigative committee of the Russian Federation that was reopened in 2018, reopened the case of the murder of Tsar Nicholas II and his family on the initiative of the bishop who happens to be close to Russia's president, Vladimir Putin. The committee pledged to find out once and for all whether the execution of the Romanov family in the summer of 1918 on the orders of the Bolsheviks had indeed been a Jewish ritual murder. So the implication, of course, of this slide and of this investigation that I just mentioned was not only that Jews routinely commit such crimes, it also aligned very closely Jews with the Bolshevik system, reinforcing the long-standing myth of Judeo-Bolshevism, which is still used today to explain and at times justify the actions of the perpetrators of the genocide of European Jewry. Thank you very much, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen here.
Thank you very much, Professor. We have a few questions from the audience. David asked towards the beginning of the presentation, how much was this propagated by the Christian Orthodox Church in the USSR, or was it by non-religious Gentiles?
So there is evidence, of course, this is an excellent question, by the way. There is evidence, and this, of course, is from, the Soviet archive, so Communist Party archive, so we have to use a grain of salt. There is evidence of this trope being used as a propaganda tool by the church leaders, the UNgar Church, and also the Russian Orthodox Church in the 1920s, which could lead us then also to think about this question of continuity, because this trope definitely was there in the pre-Soviet period, right before the revolution of 1917. So it makes sense that it could reappear in the 1920s. And be used as, as an anti-Jewish propaganda, again, to blame the Jews of Bolshevism by referring to ritual murder, something that was, if I may add, and then I'll give you back the word, Doron, it appears also in the Polish context, meaning that there were leaders of the Catholic Church that also made that argument. I worked with some of the archives also in the Vatican, and I found some evidence of that trope being used in the Catholic context as well.
Thank you very much. Regarding the painting, the large painting that you showed of the woman and the Jews around her, Brian asked, who was the artist?
This is Munkácsy, who is a very well-known Hungarian painter, and he was commissioned by an aristocratic Russian family who wanted to have this this painting. There's more about this in my book, but Munkácsy is a very well-known painter.
So regarding the book, several people asked if you could put the title in the chat. Also, maybe you have a link to where it can be purchased. Also, regarding that painting, Margot asked, can you give the title, artist, year of this large painting, please? And Ingrid asked, where is it now?
Okay, I'm looking for the correct spelling of his name. There is no title. It is in London right now. I'm going to paste, from, the usual Wikipedia here. What would we do without Wikipedia? So here is Munkácsy. I don't know if I to everyone, sorry, everyone, here it is. And I will also paste my from my book. Yes, Doron, if there are other questions.
Yes, while you're doing that, D. Strauss asked, how is the Bellis verdict worded to make it dubious?
One second. I'm trying to do too many things at the same time. Okay, that's a very good question. Mendel Baylis, in the end, is acquitted. Here is the information about my book on Amazon. So in the end, Baylis is acquitted, but if you read the text of the final, the words of Oscar Wipper, who was the prosecutor who the Soviets punished because of this, it clearly says that perhaps, Mendel Baylis didn't do it, but there might have been a sect, a group of Jews who might have carried out the murder, right? So he himself was not, but it's very clear in the wording of the verdict that that there is that uncertainty about, other sects of Jews who might engage in that crime. And that is why it's so interesting that it really echoes throughout the interwar period. Whenever there is an instance of blood libel, of ritual murder accusation, there always is reference to the Baylis case, and also the doctor's plot, right? The doctor's plot as the Baylis case of the atomic age.
Thank you very much. And I will open microphones so that if anyone would like to say thank you or have any further questions, please feel free. Just do it courteously. And if anyone who hasn't agreed for me to move them into the panelist room and would still like to open their microphone, please raise your hand and I will move you into the panelist room so you can do so. Thank you once more, Professor, for a wonderful presentation. Thank you all from all over the world for being here with us this evening. Once again, Laila Tov from Jerusalem.
If anyone has questions, please feel free. Daryl. Oh, Doron, or you? Yes, you should moderate.
The microphones are open, absolutely. If anyone has
okay. Yeah, so Daryl Miller, I see you raised your hand. Or if you would like to write in the chat, or I can't really hear if, okay, so Stephen.
Yes, hello. This is a little outside of the geographic purview. But I remember, and I think it was perhaps in Polyakov's book, that I ran across a reference to a blood libel case in Czechoslovakia in 1930. But it was just a very brief reference, and I think the local prosecutor just decided not to pursue the case. But do you know anything about this case? I've looked for other references and found nothing.
I'm not sure exactly as to which, thank you for the question, first of all, Stephen. I'm not sure as to, exactly which instance you are referring to. Nothing comes to mind right now, maybe because I'm a little, I don't know, but I can't think of that. But Hillel Kival, I'm going to write his name in the chat here, who is writing. I think his book should be coming out very soon. A wonderful historian of Central Europe. He's writing, or he wrote the most important book about the Tisa Esler affair, but he also follows other instances of blood libel accusation in Central Europe. So there might be evidence of that. The book isn't out yet, but it will come out soon.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. And by the way, excellent talk. Enjoyed it a
Thank
great
you.
deal.
Thank you.
Leah, you would like to ask a question?
Yes, I also wrote it down. I wanted to ask you, Professor, if you heard about a pogrom in Kamenets-Podolsk, Ukraine in 1926, because my grandfather was killed in this pogrom. I heard the story from my mother.
Hi, Leah. Thank you so much for your question. I do not know about a pogrom in 1926, but I do know of pogroms in 1919 and in 1920 that were very, very violent in that context. And I've written about it. It's in the other chapters of my book that don't deal with the ritual murder and deal with the pogrom. So there might be some information there, but I haven't heard of one in 1926.
Evan, you would like to ask a question? Evan?
Yes, thank you. The evolution of the blood libel, as you described it in Russia on into the Soviet period, and as you described it, the blood libel of the nuclear age. How far back would you say that this particular form of anti-Semitism and blood libel has been common to Russia particularly? And are you able to speak about the origins of this? Because and I apologize to whoever actually wrote this, I didn't see your name, but someone pointed out that the use of blood in, or the eating of any kind of blood whatsoever in Jewish tradition is obviously prohibited, and yet it seems to be this recurring theme where there is some sort of, as you mentioned, ritualistic aspect or some sort of exploitation of, non-Jewish bodies in some way, to the point that we are still seeing it now. And this is one of the things that the Iranian regime is using even now to speak ill against us, the Jewish people here in Israel and elsewhere. So is there some sort of like common thread or theme that's been running through all of that, or have you identified anything like that?
Thank you, Evan, for the questions. It's a very broad question. It would take me a very long time to, I mean, on the specific theological imagination of Jews as engaging in the consumption of blood, something that, they're prohibited to do, but how Christians imagine them doing it as a reversal of what they do. Langmuir, I wrote his name here in the chat, was a professor at Stanford, wrote the most, I would say, the most important studies in terms of, this specific, the origin of this myth from a theological vantage point. Magda Tetter also has an excellent book where she traces, it's on the Middle Ages, early modern period, but she explains how it moved from Western Europe to Eastern Europe, right? So from Great Britain and France, and then as the Jews move eastward to, the territories of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, that becomes, blood libel accusation becomes more and more widespread in that area. And so then of course that area will become part of Russia. So there is also this kind of, I would say, and I write a little bit about it, this kind of conversation between, I guess, the Catholic Church and the Russian Orthodox Church about this specific topic.
One follow-up question, if you're able to. I don't know that you'll have advice on this, but the evolution of the blood libel and the migration of it, are you aware of any sort of books that track that progress and how the myth evolves based on the locality?
I would say my book. I would say my book. Because in the concluding chapter, I also have, again, half of the book is about anti-Jewish violence or the pogroms, but the other half is really about the process of migration and permutation. The gender aspect is very important. And I take it into to some degree into the 21st century. There's more to be done, but I would say that's the book I know of.
All right. Well, thank you, Professor. This has been excellent so far. I really enjoyed it.
Professor, there are many compliments in the chat, and I will absolutely send you the transcript so you can read them yourself. There's one more question that I'd like to read out before giving a chance to Cassie and Jean to ask their questions. The question is, what triggered your interest in the subject?
So what triggered my interest in the subject is an anecdote. I was in the beautiful city of Vilnius in Lithuania, or as Jews used to call it, Vilne. In 2007, I was finishing my first book, and I met with a colleague, a Lithuanian colleague, who would teach about Christian culture and Jewish culture, Muslim culture in the context of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the early modern period. And it was at the time of Passover, and she thought that she would bring to class the matzah. And I said, okay, so what happened? And she said, well, most of the students did not even taste it. And this is 2007, and I was a little surprised. And she said, how can you be surprised? You are a historian of Eastern European Jewry, so how can you be surprised? So this kind of triggered my interest. At the same time, I also found evidence in the archives of accusations against Jews in the Soviet context, which there was nothing about it in the scholarship. So this is how I came to the topic.
Thank you very much. Cassie, you had a question?
Yeah, I just, can you hear me? Okay.
I can hear you, yes.
I just wanted to ask you, I don't know if this is the focus of your research, but to what extent, in your opinion, were the blood libels of Eastern Europe responsible for the precipitation and causation of the events of Spain of 1391?
That's a very interesting question, but I don't think that I don't think that I can answer that question from 13.
It's not in the realm of your.
Yes, 1391 is not really in the realm of my expertise, but I would suggest that you look at Magda Teta's book, who I mentioned earlier.
Okay. Can you write the name of the
Sure, I'll write it again. Here it is.
Jean, you had a question?
Thank you.
Yeah, you mentioned the possible connection of the origin of the attractiveness of the blood libel trope with the notion or related to the death of Jesus, and I'm wondering whether the ultimate origin of this story would be in a conflation between the death of Jesus and the Passover story, in which lamb's blood is painted on doorposts in order to avoid the plague of the killing of the firstborn, because it seems to me that the story of killing children would be a possible origin of this notion that eventually grew into the blood libel story.
That's an interesting point, Jean. From what I have read in terms of reception of it, from what, also reading the secondary literature that exists, church leaders, as much as we can have from the Middle Ages accounts from people, there is no reference to that. The reference is always to the killing of Christ, the reenactment of the killing of Christ.
Interesting, because I'm a storyteller, and I see in that story, what might be a germ of where this notion came from, but certainly pasting it onto for them a more modern concern regarding the death of Jesus would make sense. I'm not sure how one would investigate this, or whether there were stories told among people before the church really started propagating this, and that would require finding records or oral traditions.
Thank you very
oral
much. I think we have
tradition.
time for one more question. D. Strauss, and then we'll say goodnight.
Yes, hi. Thank you. My question is, what about East Germany when it was under Soviet control? How did they propagate all this anti-Semitism?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, it's about East Germany when it was under Soviet rule. How did they propagate anti-Semitism in East Germany? And of course, it's bad results.
Well, I mean, the Soviets would never actively propagate anti-Semitism, right? They always, in theory at least, they always did stick to the script from
Yes.
Lenin, right? We officially fight against anti-Semitism, publicly, officially. Then, of course, it all depended on local authorities. And the extent to which, they wanted to, implement any kind of anti-Jewish unofficial policy, like, keeping Jews out of schools. So this is, it's, but at the official, so there is this kind of, this tension between the official line and what is possible to do, especially in the 1940s, right? When it's clear that for the regime, for Moscow, it's not a priority. Fighting against anti-Semitism. Lenin, just to finish here, Lenin, it's not like he liked Jews. He just wanted to really kind of make a clear statement. We are not like Tsarist Russia.
Yes,
so
but
interrupt that legacy.
Okay, but I'm talking about post-war East Germany.
Yeah, post-war East Germany. Yes, that's what I said.
And they had fertile ground there. The unofficial neighborhoods and towns, there was fertile ground for anti-Semitism in East Germany.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I'm just going to go back to what I said.
Okay.
The official party line doesn't change.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor, for a wonderful presentation and for all your attention. Thank you, everyone, for coming from all over the world and joining us this evening. We'll see you in our next events. Happy to see you in our next events, and Laila Tov from Jerusalem.
Thank you, everyone.